If you've listened to Brewlosophy at all, you know how much we love Imperial Yeast. The company was founded on the ideal that if you're going to do something, do it right. From their Imperial Pitch Right pouches, packing a whopping 200 billion cells of healthy and viable yeast in each pouch, to their commitment to commercial customers, guaranteeing 10 of their most popular strains are in stock for orders up to 20 liters, or the shipping is free, Imperial Yeast does it right. No more worrying about whether you need to make a starter or propagate your yeast prior to pitching. Imperial Yeast makes it easy for the home brewer and commercial brewer to obtain direct pitches at proper rates when you need it. To place a commercial order or to get more information about everything that Imperial Yeast has to offer, head on over to imperialyeast.com. Welcome to the Brew Lab. The selection of low and no alcohol beers has certainly increased in the US during the last few years, and while they're not as popular in the US as in Europe or Australia and New Zealand, there's definitely a segment of drinkers interested in either temperance or straight alcohol avoidance, or people like myself that just sometimes like to have a low alcohol beer. And in last week's episode, I talked with Dr. Simon Carlson about using Pichia cluveri, a non-traditional yeast, to make no alcohol beers, and this week I'm back in the lab with my co-host Jordan Folks to talk about what we like and don't like about NABs and drink through some U.S. offerings. So, Jordan, welcome back to the lab.
I'm so excited to be here, Cade. You know, I haven't had that many non-alcoholic beers before. I've had some ones that were pretty bad and some that were not that far off, really, from kind of mass market lagers. So everything I have in this cooler next to me, I've never, ever had in my life. So I'm excited to see how these go.
I love that, because I think we've got some ones that are pretty popular here that I think most people that have tried a non-alcoholic beer will have tried. So I'm not going to tell you what those are yet. You're going to have to listen to the show to see what we try through. But in episode 101, we talked about consumer behavior. So we talked about who drinks non-alcoholic beer and why, and we talked about some of the things we like and don't like about non-alcoholic beer. But in this episode, we're going to drink through some non-alcoholic offerings from breweries, talk about what we like and don't like, and also talk about what information we can find, at least, about how these beers were made, and then talk about different ways, of course, to make non-alcoholic beers. And unfortunately, Simon is actually sending me some Pichia cluveri beers, but at the time of recording, I haven't received those yet, so I'm not able to try through them on the air, but maybe I can do that as an upcoming feedback, try out one of those beers in that. So I'll try to get through one of those as soon as they arrive. And thank you, Simon, for sending those to me. I'm looking forward to it. So thank you to all of our patrons out there. If you're listening to this show and you've already signed up as a patron, you rock. And if you haven't, you also rock. But I'd still love for you to become a patron. By becoming a patron, you get awesome rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session. And becoming a patron is super easy. There's no obligation. You can cancel it at any time. And it's because of our patrons that we're able to continue producing content like the website, the Brewlosophy podcast, and the new Brewlosophy show on the YouTube channel. This month's Q&A guest is Brewlosophy contributor Will Lovell. Like me, Will got his start in the Brew Club, and now he's a contributor, writing articles and brewing beers for Brewlosophy, and any question is fair game for Will, but you do have to sign up as a patron and contribute at the $3 per month level to get access to the Q&A. You can find more information on how to become a patron at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. You can also support us by using the links at brewlosophy.com/support. Start your shopping experience by using those links, and we get a small kickback. Every little bit helps, and it doesn't change your shopping experience at all. And again, you can find all of those affiliate links at brewlosophy.com/support. Feedback this week is brought to you by the folks from John I. Haas, who over the last couple of years have released a handful of really cool hop products like Lupamax, Incognito, and Flex, all intended to improve beer while reducing vegetal matter and thus increasing yields. Well, they're excited to announce their latest 100% hop-derived product, especially made for your patio, lawnmower, or beach beers. Kettle Ready imparts smooth, light, stable bitterness and kettle hop aroma to beer while offering microbiological protection during the brewing process. This new product is easy to use and has no special dosing requirements. Plus, due to its standardized high alpha acid concentration in a light, stable molecule, it gives the light stability and bitterness characteristics desired for all traditional beers. And it plays well with other Haas products, including Tetra Hop Gold, Hexa Hop, Ready Hop, and of course, all of the other liquid hop products Haas has to offer. Learn more about Kettle Ready at johnihaas.com. That's John, the letter IHAAS.com. All right, we had feedback from Will about last week's episode with Simon. So he says, "Hi, Cade. Love listening to the show. Keep up the great work. Listening to the recent episode 120 with Dr. Simon Carlson, his comment about his yeast being able to scavenge oxygen in the package caught my attention for use with actual alcoholic beers. I was wondering if his yeast could be pitched in a normal strength beer after fermentation and before packaging. For example, at dry hopper in the bright tank to help prevent cold side oxidation in the packaged beer. I don't know what percentage of monosaccharides are left in a finished fermentation, so I guess it could throw the ABV out of spec, but having the ability to consume oxygen even when kept cold sounded like a great way to prevent oxidation. Anyway, it just sounded like this yeast may have an alternative application, although maybe not cost effective." Jordan, what do you think about pitching a non-sac maltose negative yeast for oxygen scavenging? Interesting idea.
It is a really interesting idea. I obviously would just be concerned about any sort of flavor impact. It'll be interesting when you finally like to try through this beer. Is there some non-beer element that just would taste kind of out of spec flavor-wise in an IPA or a lager or something like that? But if it doesn't have a perceptible impact, or heck, if it actually has a nice perceptible impact, I think it's a cool idea.
Yeah, it's one of those things that seems really interesting to me. I don't know. I've sent this question on to Simon, and I want to see what his thoughts are on this, and I'll let you know in the future. One thing, though, I would wonder about is what sugar is there for it to do something, right? It's for it to consume the oxygen. It would have to be respiring, right, and creating energy. And so I don't know what it's doing. I don't know if the yeast would just do it if you put it in there and then just consume all the oxygen and be done, or if it would need some sort of sugar to process and generate energy. I really don't know the answer to those questions, so I'm going to ask someone that's way smarter than me and see what Simon says. But it sounds pretty interesting. It's an interesting idea, and certainly has me thinking about interesting alternative uses of this yeast. But like you, Jordan, I would also be concerned about flavor, right? If you're pitching a whole bunch of this yeast after the fermentation's done, what's it going to do? Is it going to change your beer? Is it going to add flavor? And then what do you do with that yeast once it's in there, right? Is it going to drop out of solution? Are you going to have to filter it? Do you have to centrifuge? All that sort of stuff. I know Simon mentioned that having a lot of pichia in the beer is not great for flavor over the long-term shelf stability of the beer. So lots of things, lots of questions there. And so we'll see what he says. And I'll let you know whenever I receive his response. All right, after this short break, we'll be back talking about non-alcoholic beers. The dry yeast revolution is here, and Cellar Science is leading the charge. Cellar Science has expanded the world of dry yeast far beyond the drab landscape of yesteryear. With over 20 strains of beer and wine yeast now available, you can brew any style. Not to mention that their unique growth and harvesting process greatly increases lipid levels in yeast cell walls, removing the need to aerate your wort on the first pitch and allowing you to directly pitch without rehydration. Couple that with the other advantages of dry yeast, such as higher cell count and viability, and you can clearly see why commercial breweries across the U.S. are using dry yeast and choosing Cellar Science. The use of alternative yeast strains is an interesting idea when it comes to making non-alcoholic beers. As we learned in last week's episode, some yeasts are maltose negative, meaning they cannot consume maltose, the primary sugar in beer, and Crabtree negative, which means that they prefer to generate energy through respiration using oxygen instead of fermenting. Jordan, what do you think about using alternative yeast strains for this type of application?
I think it's a cool idea, and one thing that I picked up on that episode was this idea of combining all the variables, all the techniques, right? Because perhaps as we've tasted through non-alcoholic beers, like we routinely are like, it's interesting, but it's not beer, right? And so I think that part of that is a function of the various methods, be it high mash or low mash, low alcohol, et cetera, right? And so maybe by combining all of these variables, including a alternative yeast strain, we can actually get, even closer to a more traditional beer profile.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I thought was a really good comment from Simon is he said, yeah, you use piquia, but you might also change some other aspect of the brewing process like mash high. So you have very few fermentable sugars anyway in the beer. There's nothing that says you have to do just one of these things. You can combine multiple methods and, different yeast strains. You can actually combine more than one yeast as well. Maybe like Will was suggesting in the feedback episode, using piquia as an oxygen scavenger if that's possible. But yeah, so what Jordan and I wanted to do on this episode was kind of talk through some non-alcoholic beers, try through some offerings that are available here in the US, some of which I'm sure that listeners will be able to access, and some of them are probably a little bit more hyper local to where Jordan and I are in the Pacific Northwest. But we'll try through them, talk about some of how they're made, and then talk about likes and dislikes. So what should we start with, Jordan?
Well, went to the grocery store today and got a few kind of macro offerings and some craft ones from local breweries. And when I saw O'Doul's, I knew I had to get it.
Yeah, O'Doul's. We got to start with that.
Yeah, and I guess they make two, and this is the flagship O'Doul's. Their golden non-alcoholic brew. Contains less than 0.5 alcohol by volume. And, it's made by Anheuser-Busch. I didn't realize that. I've never had this beer. I've clearly heard of it, and maybe somehow, somewhere 10 years ago, I took a sip, but I don't think I've ever actually had a full one. So I'm actually going to crack this open, and I'm excited to see how it pours in a glass. Is there foam? Is it, turbid? I have no clue what to expect.
What does an O'Doul's look like? I know what an O'Doul's looked out because I've had lots of them, lots of them over time.
First, right off the bat, it's apparently a twist off. Didn't need the bottle opener.
There you go. I suspect we're going to have that issue the whole time as we're pouring through some of these. I also went to the grocery store today to get some O'Doul's, and unfortunately, there were no O'Doul's available, and I was shocked. I was like, "This is like the beer that everyone's had." I think Marshall and I were talking about this on one of our episodes, and O'Doul's is the one for me that I think of whenever I think of non-alcoholic beer. I think he thinks of Klaus Thaler Original, the original one, not the dry hopped one. But I don't know. I mean, O'Doul's is the one. I've had it so many times. So Jordan's going to taste through it and let us know what he thinks, and then I'll talk about my experiences that I can remember from drinking O'Doul's, and then we'll get into some others.
So in terms of visuals, it is extremely clear. I can literally read the computer text through the glass. It's pretty light in color, kind of like a light lager, like a Bud Light or something like that. It did create some head, which is dissipating.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
In terms of aroma, honestly, kind of smells like a mass market lager. It's not offensive. It's kind of a familiar smell. So let's see what it tastes like.
Do you get any DMS in it, like a little touch of DMS?
Well, I will say that the time that I did a DMS flavor standard, I wasn't that offended by it. So yeah. Maybe I'm not that sensitive to DMS, or maybe I don't care. But I'm not really getting any sort of overwhelming DMS aroma. Yeah. Maybe a little green apple in the nose, maybe not. But I think all in all, it smells pretty solid for a kind of mass market lager. So let's see how it tastes.
Yeah, see how it tastes. That's actually my memory of O'Doul's is a little bit like Rolling Rock. I mean, not the full like DMS bomb that Rolling Rock is, but just a little bit of DMS there. But maybe that's just me and what I taste. I certainly remember the green apple whenever I was doing it. That's more like acetaldehyde or something else, but or just really a fruity ester that's available in that beer. But that one's a really good one for me. And O'Doul's is so interesting because that's the one that I feel like was around for 20 or 30 years. And that was the one that, like, when you would say 10 years ago, I'm drinking a non-alcoholic beer, it was like O'Doul's. And that was, I mean, no offense to O'Doul's, but it was not my favorite. I would always be like, why are people drinking this? It tastes just like a thin, even thinner, mass market lager.
Okay, so first couple sips in, it's pretty good.
Yeah,
it's.
Right.
I went to a thing last night, and we went and had a nightcap at a dive bar with a couple friends, and I had a Rainier and a Miller High Life, and this is very similar to a Rainier or Miller High Life. Like, it honestly tastes like a low, 4% or whatever mass market lager. kind of kicks ass.
Nice. So you're going to be sipping on that one the whole episode. And guess what? Not getting drunk either.
Right.
So yeah. So O'Doul's, of course, is it's a less than 0.5% beer. So it's not actually a total like 0.0. And were you able, Jordan, to find out anything about how O'Doul's is brewed?
I guess it's a real beer, and I don't know what strength they're brewing it to, but with brewing ingredients, malt and hops and yeast, and they say low temp, low pressure distillation to remove the alcohol. That doesn't mean much to me. Do you know much about that process?
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah. So it's low temp and low pressure so that they can distill it. I mean, essentially they create a distillation. The alcohol comes up out of solution and they take it off, take it out. So the alcohol's gone. And not totally gone because not all of the alcohol leaves. But I mean, it makes a less than 0.5% alcohol beer. That's actually a pretty common method, or at least was a common method like a while ago, right? This distillation. Distillation's obviously hard for a lot of people to do, right? Because you have to have the right equipment to be able to do this. And you are pulling the alcohol off, right? So it's basically like, burning the alcohol off the top of it. And that was a lot of the concern about that method was, hey, if you're distilling off the alcohol, what else is coming off with it, right? Because there's volatiles that are coming off, probably before the alcohol comes off, or at least along with the alcohol as it's coming out of solution. So you've got this, you brew a beer and it's a beer like in the tank, and then you distill it like you would distill anything else. So raise it, you would boil it in a normal still, but this uses lower pressure and allows for a lower temperature, so you don't have to boil the beer. But it's the same principle, right? The alcohol volatilizes and comes off, and then you separate it out as it floats away, and then the rest of the beer just stays in there. And so, I mean, that's I think why a lot of people were talking about it is like it's just kind of a normal mass market version of non-alcoholic beer.
Well, it really does kind of just taste like a standard mass market macro lager. I'm not getting like a ton of weird off flavors, or it doesn't taste foreign. Like I had Heineken 0.0 one time, and it was pretty close, but it had this kind of weird aftertaste. This, I mean, maybe you could convince me there's an aftertaste thing on this, but not really. It's pretty dang clean, and I'm really impressed. If you wanted to drink a PBR or something like that, and that was the kind of flavor profile you're going for, I think they really knocked this out of the park in terms of a non-alcoholic option. It's not like lacking anything. It's a little thin, I guess, but overall, I think it's a really good representation of macro lager.
Yeah, I mean, and so this is maybe one of the reasons why O'Doul's was around for such a long time, right? I mean, I think back to that episode that I did with Scott LaFontaine looking at like flavors of beer, and a lot of people just want beer flavored beer, right? That's what they want. And so for something like O'Doul's, this is exactly, if you're trying to replace mass market lager, O'Doul's is a great one for non-alcoholic beers. And again, this is the one that I saw people drinking as I was growing up as a kid, and like, it's the first non-alcoholic beer that I ever tried, and it's, it's not my favorite of the non-alcoholic beers, but it's okay.
Yeah, and me personally, I don't keep Rainier at the house or PBR, Coors, etc. But if you're in New Orleans or something, there's a time and a place. And so I like a mass market macro lager on certain occasions, and I think that they did a good job. So maybe let's move on to another mass market offering.
Exactly. So I've got Coors Edge next, and this one we both have, right? You've got it. All right, sweet. So Jordan and I are both going to open the Coors Edge right now, and this is another version of a mass market lager.
Is it a twist off? Okay, it is.
It is a twist off, and it didn't fizz.
Mine
when I
did.
Opened it. Okay, good. So, hopefully yours is more carbonated than mine is. We'll see. All right.
So it looks pretty identical, maybe a smidge darker than the O'Doul's. Wow. Less head formation on mine.
Mine's got head formation, but it's really thin bubbles. Like I can tell it's going to go away real quick. It looks like seltzer water head, right? Like it's not thick, it's not dense. It's fading really fast.
Well, speaking of non-alcoholic options, side note, I made another hop water recently, and the head is insane on it. And I mean, it's like pouring like a Hefeweizen or something. And so who knew that hop water could have such intense head?
Dude, and I can't wait to see the experiment on that one. That was a crazy one. But back to the non-alcoholic beers. Yeah, so my head's totally gone now. I've got barely a collar. It looks kind of like just a little bit, a little bit of bubbles, very, very loose, very big bubbles around the edges. It's nice and clear, though. It's brilliant. It's a little bit darker, right? I would call this like a light gold, even like above a straw. It's not as like light as I would have thought for a Coors, for example. Oh, you know what it looks like? It looks like Coors Banquet. That's what it looks like. It's the color of Coors Banquet or like MGD. It's not the color of like of Coors Light or Miller Lite. It's not that. It's got just like a little bit more color to it, more of like a true barley color.
In terms of aroma, I mean, it kind of smells like Coors.
Totally. Yeah, I think so. It totally smells like Coors. Yeah, that's pretty good, right? That's pretty. I like that. I mean, if I'm thinking about like replacing Coors, hey Marshall, if you're listening to this, I know you're a Miller Lite guy, but this one tastes pretty close.
Yeah, it's a little thin, a little watery, but the flavor's nice. Kind of that light hop, light malt kind of macro lager thing. It's really not bad. And no off flavors, nothing offensive, nothing weird. I'm not getting any sort of weird twang or back of the palate lingering. Pretty good.
Yeah, no, I'm not getting any of that stuff either, but it is kind of like there's something a little bit cloying at the back. Not like thick, but it's like actually cloying is really not the word for it. Because it's light body, right? It's thin body. This is not a thick beer, so cloying isn't the way to say it. But there's something like starchy tasting towards the end of it as I drink through it. The nose is great. Yeah, it's like lightly estery, just like a Coors Light would be. There's just a little bit of, maybe apple pear, that kind of thing, like very, very light flavored beer ester. But then on the back end, it like where I think maybe where I'm expecting the alcohol to be from a normal Coors Light just isn't there, right? And so it just kind of finishes, and then the flavors, like maybe the esters like linger on your palate more than like a Coors Light does. It's not as crisp. There we go.
It's not as carbonated as I would have expected either. Mm-mm. It's not flat by any means, but it's a very moderate level of carbonation. Maybe less so than I would expect in a draft Coors or something like that. Now, is that a thing with non-alcoholic beer? Is there any sort of relationship with CO2 and package and the production method or the tasting experience? Is there any reason chemically or logistically as to why it would have a lower level of CO2 than I would expect?
There shouldn't be. The only thing that maybe is a taste, like a sensory perception. So if the beer doesn't have as much of like a body or something because of the alcohol, if you're missing some of that sweetness, you could over-carbonate it, right? And then you just have like a super spritzy carbonated water.
Interesting. Yeah, so by keeping the carbonation a little more moderate, it can maybe add a little perception of body that the high CO2, the high level of carbonation could overly thin it out in terms of perception.
Yeah, exactly. Overly thin it out in terms of perception. And speaking of like thinning it out, this is interesting because the bottle itself, first of all, there was no information that I could find on how Coors Edge was made. So this is entirely speculation. But the bottle says double brewed for a refreshing taste. It's a non-alcoholic malt beverage with natural flavor. And that's interesting. So it like what I could find online, that whole double brewed thing, it says it's actually two beers blended to taste like Coors Banquet. And so Coors Banquets, they're like whatever their flagship, like Budweiser or like MGD, Coors Banquet. So it's interesting. Any idea what that means by double brewed?
Yeah, I wonder if they're using two different methods. Like one's a special yeast strain and one's distillation or something. I don't know. And like we talked about at the top of the episode, that by combining multiple methods, maybe you can get closer to a more authentic tasting product. And it sounds like they're even having two different streams that are using different methods. That maybe one, has got a little bit of this off flavor, but at 25% in the blend, you can't really taste it. But it's, too much body or whatever, and then collectively they can dial that in.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if they're blending down, like if they're blending from, if they make like a normal strength beer or maybe like have some residuals left over from something else. And then they're just adding in like you said, an alternative yeast with no alcohol into it and just like diluting it down. I'm really not sure. It's kind of interesting to think about like how they do this, because I know one thing that a lot of the big brewers are doing is membrane filtration. So they're doing distillation too, which that's a very common way to do it, where you just distill off the alcohol. But there are also a lot of brewers out there are doing membrane filtration, and sometimes both. So membrane filtration is just exactly what it sounds like. It's a membrane that's small enough to catch the alcohol, right? And so the alcohol gets filtered off or doesn't make it through the membrane, and then the rest of the beer makes it through. So like water makes it through, but alcohol doesn't. And so that's essentially membrane filtration. So if you combine both of these, you can actually make a 0-0 beer. And that's my understanding how most places are actually making a 0-0 beer, is by literally filtering out all of the alcohol out of the solution using a membrane filtration. So if you see 0-0, like Heineken 0-0, or Coors Edge doesn't, Coors Edge says it's less than 0.5%. So this is, alcohol free in the United States and Europe, but not in some other countries. But that's, if you see 0-0, that it has no alcohol in it, most likely membrane filtration. So I'm wondering here, they double brewed and then, 2 beers coming together. That's interesting to me.
And isn't there a concern with membrane filtration that you could be stripping out some of the flavors, filtering out some of the flavors? And so
totally.
That's why there's kind of these new modern techniques in an attempt to have a more flavorful NA beverage.
Yeah, totally. You can absolutely do that. Because it's pulling out, membrane filtration is a size, right? So any molecule that is bigger than alcohol, and alcohol is a decent sized molecule, but it's not huge, right? So anything that's bigger than alcohol is getting pulled out.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that Coors, we're 2 for 2. These were both great examples of mass market lager. Honestly, there's so little alcohol in those to begin with. I don't know that I would have thought any different. I think you could have fooled me if you gave me these at a dive bar or something and poured in a glass. I probably would have thought I was drinking a 4% macro lager.
Yeah, it's interesting because it, like, the flavor's there and it tastes like a non-alcoholic beer, but it's missing something, and maybe it is missing the alcohol, obviously, right? But like there's a crispness and a quenchingness. This beer is nice, but like when you're drinking like a nice a Coors Light or Coors Banquet, for example, to stay on brand for Coors, I want more, right? Like I want to continue drinking it. This, I feel like I've had a couple of sips and I'm kind of like, okay, this is good. I'll have this one and then I'm done. I'll finish this one. I don't know. You having that experience or no?
I'm okay with it, but also I don't drink a ton of macro lager to begin with. So it's kind of, someone that it's not the thing that they necessarily orient their beer drinking towards. It kind of scratches that itch for me. Yeah. But I think that what's interesting about these two examples, O'Doul's Golden and the Coors Edge, is that it's a really just kind of replicating or mimicking a mass market macro lager. So low hops, low malt, no fermentation character. And I think that it kind of makes sense that these are decent representations of that because there's not that much there to begin with. So I think now we're going to start to transition into some more, quote, alleged flavorful options. And we'll see, is that harder to hit? Is that harder to recreate? Is it more enjoyable because we're bringing in more flavor? Or is it going to be kind of weird and off flavory? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And the final thing on Coors Edge before we leave it is this whole natural flavor concept too, right? So they're clearly adding flavor back into this. Who knows what flavors they're adding, but they're adding something back into this beer because that membrane filtration or whatever it is that they're doing is pulling out flavor. And that's an issue. That's one of the things that Simon was talking about with non-alcoholic beers is when you're doing these things, you're losing a lot of the flavor. And so trying an alternative yeast like the Pichia Cluveri that he was talking about, or Near, I think is the Christian Hansen brand for it, may add more flavor. But if you're trying to hit a mass market lager, seems like O'Doul's and the Coors Edge are good examples. Now, like you said, we're going to switch to something with more flavor. And so this is the second one that I tried for non-alcoholic beers. This is the Klausthaler dry hopped version.
So we're still at a mass market macro lager kind of level. I guess it's probably made in Germany, right? Radeberger is the importer, and it's brewed at Darmstadter Landstrasse in Frankfurt. but it's dry hopped. And so
Yeah.
it's a little bit of both. And it says using Cascade hops, it's unfiltered. But look at the back. It has the package date. I'm curious when yours is packaged. Mine's a year old.
Oh shoot, mine is too. Yeah, that's crazy. That's
they put a like a year and a half shelf life on this too. It's like we'll see
a
how
little
this
bit shorter. Mine's like October. It says October 11th, 2022.
Yeah.
So mine's a little bit less than a year old, but holy moly, it's a year old. Does that mean that non-alcoholic beers don't sell?
Right.
Oh no.
I'm sure that from a food safety standpoint, that's got plenty of shelf life in it. But from a dry hop standpoint, we will see how this goes. So
Right?
I'm guessing this is not a twist off, and it's not.
Yeah. This one's gonna be a pop. So let's see what happens.
A little bit of hiss.
Oh, yep. I got some hiss on mine too. All right.
So right off the bat, the best head formation we've seen yet.
Oh yeah.
Really,
Well,
really nice, thick, tiny bubbles. More of a bordering on like a light amber almost. It's a weird kind of color actually.
Yeah, it's like very dark, or more dark than the other two, right? It's almost a brown, like fully amber color,
like a burnt orange, but kind of like almost like dirty dishwater. It's not the most attractive color, and it's not that clear.
Yeah,
I can't see, and maybe it's just a function of the SRM, but I can't see text through the glass as easily. But it's not murky by any means.
Yeah, no, not murky. Not murky, but definitely darker, right? Like definitely the darkest version that we've seen so far.
So on the nose, I'm getting kind of like old hops, oxidized hops.
Yeah, definitely on the nose. I'm certainly getting this like stale hop kind of a character. I mean, that's probably a function of the beer being a year old, right? I mean, not like what it would taste like whenever it's normal and fresh, but it's definitely hoppy, right? Like there is hop flavor in this one that was not in the Coors Edge for me, and probably not in the O'Doul's for you either, right?
Well, I haven't tasted it yet, but on the nose, I also kind of get a bit of like black tea, iced tea. Okay,
maybe something a little bit herbal. But having tasted it, it tastes like this to me it's an interesting beer because it looks like it should be an amber, and I kind of expect it to taste like sweet, like an amber, but it's really just bitter, and hoppy, right? But the hops are unfortunately kind of old in this version of it. But it's really like I don't know, it's not sweet. It's really starchy. It's really starchy to me. Tastes like you licked a potato. Yeah. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I mean, one, it's old, so it's unfair to judge this beer compared to the others, which were presumably more fresh, made stateside, and maybe selling better. I don't know. But I don't like it. And I would love to try a fresh example to see how it is supposed to taste. And who knows how long this sat warm before it even made it into a fridge.
Oh,
but,
totally. Yeah.
It almost kind of tastes like a hop tea. I think they're called Hoplark or something like that out of Colorado, and they're making carbonated hopped iced teas. And it kind of reminds me of that. And I don't love their stuff either. It's interesting, but it's bitter. Yeah. And it's got this kind of like sweetness that I wouldn't have expected in an NA German offering. I was expecting a dry beer. This does not work for me. This is definitely the worst of the three I've had thus far.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because it just says it's dry hopped. So if you look, Klausthaler has two versions, and I think a lot of people will have tried Klausthaler Original first. That's in the green bottle, right? So comes in a green bottle, and it tastes probably, in my opinion, it tastes just like the O'Doul's. It's kind of like mass market lager, but with more of a German flair to it. So it's got a little bit of continental malt character, which to me gives it a little bit of like, I don't know, skunkiness or something like that. But it's good, right? It's tasty. It's fine. And then the dry hopped one seems like they were trying to add more flavor, but I'm wondering if in doing that, it just ended up making it like, I don't know, less desirable. But people seem to really like the dry hopped one. And I will say, I like the dry hopped one better than the original one. This is probably a really bad example because it's a year old. But whenever I was like really, into dry Januaries or like trying to cut out alcohol for a long period of time, Klausthaler was one that I started drinking more of than like O'Doul's. Like I would start with O'Doul's and try that for a little while and then switch over to the Klausthaler just because it had a little bit more flavor, right? It's got a little bit more hop flavor. It's It's got something kind of malty in there. It's kind of sweet, but again, my problem with Klausthaler is it's bitter and very bitter, for my opinion, based on like what the non-alcoholic should be, and it's got this like starchy flavor to it, which I'm starting to like identify in a lot of non-alcoholic beers as this starchy, wordy kind of flavor, and it's not something that I particularly enjoy, at least anymore.
Yeah, and it's astringent, and I don't know what's causing that. My assumption is it's related to the hops, but I'm curious. The starchy, wordy flavor. What is that? Like, what is their process? Where do you think that's coming from?
So this is interesting because they actually have a lot. On their website, they say that they use cutting edge technology, that they pioneered for an innovative method of brewing non-alcoholic beer. And it says, while the competition tried a different way to brew beer and extract the alcohol after the fact, Klausthaler developed a process where only a negligible amount of alcohol is produced in the first place, which is interesting. And then it later goes on to say that it's brewed in a way that essentially results in little or no maltose production, and then it's bottom fermented with a normal beer. It says it's specially bottom fermented, but with an otherwise normal beer, which I think, or with normal brewing yeast, which is interesting. So it's like, okay, so this makes me think this is more like that high mash temp method, and maybe that's where some of that wordy flavor is coming from, because with those high mash temps, you're not producing as much fermentable sugars, but there is a lot of aldehyde production. It's interesting that they said that they use normal beer or yeast, normal brewer's yeast, because normal brewer's yeast are really good at taking up aldehyde. And so that could really reduce some of that starchy flavor, but maybe just not quite getting all of it, or maybe there's just too much starchiness there for the yeast to do it. But so this sounds like, to me, higher mash temp or change in the mash temp, and then an arrested fermentation. So stopping the fermentation when it's finished. So those two methods coming together, but both pre-alcohol production, which I think is interesting.
Okay, so while you were talking, I thought it'd be crazy. You know, I'm sitting here in the brewery. I thought, why don't I take a gravity reading on this thing? Because it's really sweet, right? And so I had to degas it, and there's a little bit of temperature correction here, so we'll just live with that bit of error. But first, right off the bat, my finishing gravity hydrometer couldn't read it. It's that sweet.
Oh my gosh! Wait, so it was higher. It was higher finishing gravity than is the numbers on your finishing gravity reader.
Right.
So what does it go up to? Like 1020? So it's like higher than 1020.
Yeah. So I used a standard hydrometer, and it's about 1022, 1024.
Nice. Okay, that's a lot of residual sugar in that.
Especially for a dry hopped lager, like maybe for like like an imperial stout or something like that. Even though like the big thick boys, they're finishing like 1060 or something like that. But for a dry hopped lager type beer from Germany, 1024 is sweet.
Yeah, that's really, really thick, or at least a lot of residual sugar in there. That makes me wonder if that's what that kind of wordy flavor is, if that's what that kind of like, sweetness or whatever. I don't know. Sweetness isn't the right word. The like licking a potato kind of flavor in there. There's so much leftover dextrins in it. Wow. That's pretty incredible that there's that much left in that beer. Klausthaler, an interesting beer, and certainly, it's the original one, I think, is the one that is like most well known, and I think that was certainly the one that like started non-alcoholic beers. I mean, that and O'Doul's are like in my mind like the two classics. If you think about non-alcoholic beers, but really interesting to talk about these three different beers and talk about their different processes, from like distillation, where you're distilling the alcohol out, to membrane filtration, to a combination of both membrane filtration, and then ending with Klausthaler, which is like using a brewing process that stops maltose production, and then just fermenting it with the normal brewer's yeast. I think those are really cool, and really some great national examples of non-alcoholic beers that are here and available in the US. And so if you can get your hands on these, I encourage you to try them out and listen along with us. We're going to take a break and we'll grab some more near beer, and we'll be back focusing on flavor and aroma of some of the craft styles to see what we get whenever we add a little bit more flavor to our beers. One of the biggest improvements to my brewing practices was the upgrade to stainless steel, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which holds 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to reduce the chances of a messy blow-off, and it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brew systems out there, and their prices are remarkably affordable. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, you've got to check out deltabrewingsystems.com. We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brewlosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app. While non-alcoholic beers have certainly been growing in popularity in the US, there's still a segment of drinkers like Brewlosophy's Marshall Schott that won't drink non-alcoholic beers. Marshall says he's never had a non-alcoholic beer that he actually likes. And Jordan, are you in the same boat?
You know, I think I was until today. In that last segment, the Coors Edge and the O'Doul's really rocked. If you wanted a mass market lager that didn't have alcohol in it,
right.
I think I've only really tried kind of craft stuff like IPA, etc., and it's never really scratched the itch for me. And then I've had the Heineken 0.0. Pretty close, but a little weird thing. But, you know, like you said, it really is growing in popularity in the U.S. here. I think that Athletic Brewing might be the biggest gains in market share of any brewery in the nation, alcohol or not. And so that says a lot. And I think they have breweries on both coasts at this point, and they're just crushing it in the NA game. And your guest last week, you know, spoke about how the market just isn't nearly as advanced here as it is in Europe, and that's really true. And he pontificated that perhaps it's like American drinkers got burned by having some lower quality examples in the past. And while that might be true, I think that a big difference here is just we have a different cultural connection with beer. You know, in Germany, beer is life. Beer is food, you know?
Right.
I literally saw a priest with the collar drinking a beer on the train in Berlin at like 3 p.m. one time. You know, it's like, it's just, they're so beer obsessed there that even people that aren't going to drink for the purposes of intoxication want a beer. And we don't have that kind of relationship with beer in America. Yeah, but I think craft beer is changing everything. And as people begin to abstain, you know, go through pregnancy or whatever reason, other health concerns, they can't drink, they still want an IPA, or they don't want to, you know, the FOMO, the FOMO is real. And so it's really interesting to see this segment take off.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Athletic, like you said, is the best example there, in my opinion. I mean, looking at Athletic whenever they burst onto the scene, I don't know, 10 years ago or so at this point, maybe not that long. But when they did it, one of the reasons why it stood out so well is because they came out with like a porter, right? And you know, and a golden ale and an IPA. And for the first time, you had non-alcoholic beers that weren't just mass market lagers. I mean, Klausthaler Dry Hopped was the closest thing that you had to a beer with any flavor other than beer flavored beer. And I think that was what was really shocking. I remember the first time I had the non-alcoholic porter from Athletic, I was like, holy crap, this is really good. I can't believe that non-alcoholic beers actually taste not like watered down versions of the normal beers. And so Athletic has done a fantastic job. I think their process also involves using a proprietary yeast. So they are using an alternative yeast to make their beers, which is really cool. And so Athletic started doing this, and then it feels like everybody jumped on board, right? Like now there's a non-alcoholic beer at you know, every brewery, and there's a little bit of some health concern there, because remember, the non-alcoholic beers don't have alcohol. They're generally not as low pH. So they don't have these built-in protections against microbes that other places have. So brewers generally don't have to worry about, dangerous microbes infecting your beer, but you do with non-alcoholic beers. So there's a little bit of issue there. But a lot of breweries have come out with some really, really good examples. So, of course, we were at the store today getting, craft beers, and we've got 2 examples of an IPA. So what are you drinking? And I'll tell everybody what I'm drinking.
So I'm super excited to try this. This is Fremont's non-alcoholic IPA. If you're not in the Northwest, you might not know Fremont. They are in Seattle, Washington. Incredible brewery. Definitely, if you're in Seattle, that would be one of the number 1 recommendations I would give. And they're one of those places, they're kind of big, but they can do no wrong. Anything they do, they absolutely crush it. And going to the tap room is really fun because they have tap room only releases that are really special. They're a really solid kind of gas station beer or something like that. You can trust it, especially if it's fresh. And they made a hop water that really blew me away. And so given their success in the hop water realm, I'm excited to see how they do in a non-alcoholic IPA. What do you got?
You've got Fremont, and I've got 10 Barrel. So 10 Barrel makes what they call NAIPA. This is a non-alcoholic IPA. And of course, 10 Barrel is another regional brewery here, but it's big. Like it's a big beer. I mean, I think I might have shared it on this show before, but if you tell my oldest son, to go get me a beer out of the refrigerator, go get daddy a beer, he'll come back with a 10 Barrel beer called Pub Beer. And it's just a can. It's a white can with black lettering, and it says Pub Beer on it. And it's just a mass market lager, But 10 Barrel's doing fantastic things. They're a great brewery, bring really, really good beer. They have a fantastic selection of IPAs. In fact, I think that's probably what they're most known for is their like outdoor IPA series. So these beers are intended to be like consumed outside, when it's hot, or when you're outside camping, or even whenever you're like snow skiing or doing something athletic outside. They're intended to be consumed, but they're alcoholic, right? And they're IPAs. So they're going to be upwards of 6%, maybe even 7%. So this NAIPA kind of fits a segment for them, right? Like you're out skiing on the slopes and it's really hot and you need something refreshing, and you want to drink a beer, but you don't want to get drunk. NAIPA comes in. So I'm pretty excited to try this one too. And having been to 10 Barrel's tap room there in Bend, it's pretty cool to see their facilities. I mean, they've got like they've sunk some good cash into their facilities there. It's kind of pristine, state of the art, really up to date brewing method. So I'm excited to try it. So let's see. I'll crack open mine and you get yours.
Yeah, and while we're doing that, I'll just another shout out for 10 Barrel. Their main production facilities in Bend. They also have a Portland tap room, and they were bought by AB InBev. And as much as I try to avoid, big beer, try to support local, they just crush it. They are so good. They're maybe my favorite in Bend, but they just announced that they were sold. Did you see that, Cade?
Yeah, I did. So, I saw. What's the name? I can't remember the name of the group that they sold to, but basically all the Portland holdings, like Widmer and all of the other AB stuff, has been sold to a cannabis company, right?
Right. I think maybe even a Canadian cannabis company.
Yeah, I think that's
Don't
right.
quote me on that, but so they're independent-ish again.
Yeah, exactly. Well, independent or at least part of a group, right? I mean, with Widmer and some of these other bigger beers too. But yeah, it's really interesting. 10 Barrel's crushed it. I'm excited when I go to Seattle. I'll be in Seattle in October. I'm going to check it out, and I'll have to check out Fremont while we're there. So pouring this 10 Barrel IPA, wow, it's hazy, right? Not hazy, but it's not as clear. I should have checked the date on this one too. December 14th, 2022. Ugh.
Yeah. Mine's
we'll see.
4/25/23, so mine's 4 months old.
Okay, that's not too bad, but still an IPA, a 4-month-old IPA. Mine's got decent head on it, and the head stuck around. I mean, I think this is the first beer that I've had that the head actually stayed around, and it's actually got some nice lacing on the glass now too. So they kind of tilt the glass around. There's like decent head formation. It looks nice. It's certainly not as clear as the other two. I can still see through the glass. It's not a juicy, hazy IPA, but it's got some haze in it. It's not clear.
Pretty much the same exact review on the Fremont IPA over here. A little bit of haze. You can kind of see the text on the other side of the glass, and really incredible lacing and head formation.
Yeah.
What are you getting on your aroma?
Whoa, that is bursting with tropical flavor. I'm like, holy moly. For this being brewed almost a year ago, like 8 months or 10 months ago. No, 8 months ago. That's amazing. That's got a lot of hop flavor in it.
You mean aroma?
Oh, man. Yeah, I'm sorry. A lot of hop aroma. That's got like a citrus. It's got grapefruit. It's got some lemon and lime. There's even like a little bit of like orange and mango, like very tropical bouquet. That smells incredible.
So mine is a bit more restrained.
Okay.
It kind of smells like a mass market IPA, like something that's like big production runs that you'd see at a gas station or something like that. Not offensive by any means. And a little more like Northwest IPA, dank and pine. Maybe a little bit of like lime zest or something like that. And I'm terrible with this stuff, by the way. But I love IPA, and I love very aromatic IPA. You know, I'm like 10 ounces in a 5-gallon batch dry hop kind of guy. And this is kind of subdued, but I'm not mad.
Diminishing returns, Jordan. Diminishing returns.
Yeah. We'll see.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this one's great. It smells really, really nice on the nose. I'm really excited to try it. I'm going to go ahead and give it a drink. Wow. That's actually really good. Oh, it's got a little bit of wordy aftertaste, though. Dang. That was really tasty on the front, right? Like on the front, it tastes almost like I'm drinking like pog juice. Like it's very fruity, very aromatic, very low bitterness. It's not hazy. It's not like a hazy IPA. It's not thick. It's not juicy like that. But it's got so much aroma in it, almost like flavoring, right? It's like orange juice flavoring or something in this. But it doesn't say it has flavorings on the can. I'm not suggesting that they're adding flavorings in there, but that's kind of the intensity of what I'm getting from the hops. But then, whoa, that back end was just like, boom, here's the leftover malt that was in this beer.
Yeah, this one... it doesn't taste like an alcoholic IPA. It's got a bit of twang, and I'm wondering if they're like going kind of heavy-handed in their pH reduction via lactic acid or something like that for safety concerns. It's a little bitter, but it's just kind of got this like kind of bizarre, undescribable kind of twang that just kind of permeates the whole experience. And is a hophead, it's not really hitting the mark for me, but if you can't drink alcohol, like I don't know where else I would turn. So maybe it would work for someone that, scratches the itch enough. But it's not for me as someone that doesn't abstain from alcohol. I would probably be going to an O'Doul's over this.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I think I'm picking the Coors Edge over this one just because, man, that nose it smells great. You know, if you've had this experience, I know you have, where you've smelled a beer and you go, oh my God, this is going to be really good. And then you drink it and it's kind of like, it kind of like deflates. It's like, oh man, it's so close to being good though. The nose is there, the aroma's there, the first initial impression, it's got good carbonation on it, it's got good mouthfeel. It doesn't taste thin, it doesn't taste watery. But wow, that wordy sort of licking a potato flavor that I was talking about in Klausthaler is much more prominent in this beer. Now, again, this is from December of 2022, right? So I think we're starting to see a little bit of a trend here that the non-alcoholic beers maybe aren't coming off of grocery store shelves as much as other beers are. But yeah, it's definitely got that like wordy aftertaste to it. And even as I sit here and have several sips, I'm tasting it like in my mouth. You know, like you know when you cut like a russet potato and that like white stuff comes out of it, and if you like touch it on your skin and it dries on your skin, it feels like it just stays there. That's kind of this experience that I'm getting in my mouth right now.
I'm not getting that on this one. The Fremont is very thin. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just like lower bodied and dry. It's very dry. And the more I drink it, the more I dislike it less. It's a really interesting attempt at a non-alcoholic IPA. It's not wordy, but it's a little bitter. It's not like out of this world bitter, but it's a little bitter. And looking at the recipe on the internet, they say 2-row pale and carapils with Citra and Citra Cryo, 85 IBU.
So, whoa.
yeah. And it's dry, it's crisp, it's bitter. And it's got, there's some IPA elements that are definitely there, but I just think it's hard to you don't have the malt body. You don't have the alcohol sweetness. I think that IPA, that 7.5% or so, is really that sweet spot, no pun intended, because something happens with a little bit of alcohol sweetness, and you just can't have that with a less than 0.5 alcohol per volume beer. So I think it's a good attempt, but it's tough making really good non-alcoholic IPA, I think.
Totally. And I really wish, I really do wish that the flavor matched the nose on this beer, because it smells really, really tasty. It's just got a little bit of that starchy wordiness on the end of it. And I couldn't unfortunately find anything about how NAIPA is brewed. But it tastes a lot like Klausthaler, so maybe employing some of the same methods that Klausthaler was making, some of those like high temperature mash methods, or like low maltose production in the mash, and then normal brewer's yeast. It's super fruity though, and like, wow, it really, really pops whenever you smell it. So, I could certainly see this being really tasty for some consumers that maybe don't care about that, wordy flavor. But I don't know, that's going to linger with me a little bit and make it kind of hard for me to drink more than one if with that aftertaste.
Yeah, and given that this one, the Fremont, is really dry and thinner bodied, I'm wondering if they kind of started low and finished low.
Yeah, maybe. I wish I had my hydrometers over here. I'm sitting in the recording studio, not in the brewery. But if I had my hydrometer, I'd go and measure this one and see what the residual gravity is on this NAIPA, right? Because this one tastes very, very similar to the Klausthaler, and I'm wondering if it's up in that like 1020 or 1025 range. And so maybe that's where we're getting some of these sugars, or some of these this starchy, wordy flavor. But again, I don't want to confuse anybody by like talking about this wordy flavor and tying it to sugars. It may be dextrins, but it's more than likely aldehydes. That's kind of what most people are talking about. And a lot of brewers' yeasts will take up aldehydes as part of fermentation process, but they also produce them. They produce the aldehydes and then they take them up. And if the yeast can't complete or can't do its like normal full life cycle like it wants to do, then a lot of those aldehydes are going to be left in the beer. And so that's why we're exploring alternative yeast. That's why we're exploring cold fermentation and using, membrane filtration and all of these other methods to get a nice, clean, crisp beer. So this is why non-alcoholic beers are tough to make. But this is, again, it's a good example. It's really fruity. I just wish it didn't have that wordy flavor.
So given the wordy flavor, perhaps a high finishing gravity, what would your guess be in terms of production method? Some sort of non-fermentative yeast?
No, I'm guessing that it's like a different mash procedure. So like a high temperature mash procedure that's not producing a lot of maltose. So very, very little maltose. And then probably a normal brewer's yeast, right? Like just a regular, whatever their house brewer's yeast was, or maybe their IPA brewer's yeast that they're using, that they pitch into this, and it ferments whatever little bit of maltose and simple sugars that were there, and then cuts off, so it's just not completing its full like yeast growth life cycle. That's my guess, but who knows?
Right. Yeah. And maybe even possibly a halted fermentation or something like that, if you're getting some sweetness.
Yeah, could be a halted fermentation as well too. Yeah, it's interesting. It's good. Like I said, it's good. I'm not like poo-pooing on this beer. That nose smells great. It smells really nice and fruity. It's just that aftertaste that's bugging me on this. So you have another version of a non-alcoholic beer, and this is a wildly different style. You've got a Deschutes Black Butte Porter, which, if you've heard Deschutes Black Butte Porter, that's a style-defining American porter, right? I think it's listed in the BJCP guidelines as a commercial example of American porter style. This is an iconic beer that's brewed in the Pacific Northwest, and it's you've got the non-alcoholic version, right?
I do, yeah. It says Black Butte non-alcoholic. It doesn't say porter. I guess they don't want to confuse the brands there.
Yeah.
And less than 5% alcohol. Contemplate a notable pub offering anchored with chocolate and roast malts and refusal to compromise.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got here. And I've heard really good things about this one. Notable beer guy out here claimed it was the best NA beer he's ever tried.
Oh, I think my wife might agree with him. So we were sitting in Bend when she was pregnant with our second child. And I was, of course, trying the different offerings that Deschutes has to offer. And she saw this on the tap and she had it and she loved it. She was like, wow, I can't believe that there's actually a beer that's non-alcoholic, right? And that's the way she described it, was like as a beer. This is a beer and it's not alcoholic, but which I thought was funny. It wasn't like, oh, this is just a watered down version of something else. It was like, no, this actually tastes like a beer. You have that Black Butte Porter, and I have another version of IPA. So I wasn't able to get the Deschutes Black Butte Porter, but I have Crux Fermentation Project's No-Mo IPA. So this one's super popular here in the Pacific Northwest, but it is probably hyper local. So if you're outside of the Pacific Northwest, it's going to be pretty hard to find this one. It's from Bend, but it's a relatively small brewery, although up and coming and doing some great things. The Crux Pilsner is absolutely one of my favorite light lagers in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, who knew that Bend was a hot spot for craft non-alcoholic production? This is our third Bend brewery with an NA offering, and they have a lot for a 100,000 person town, but they don't have that many breweries, less than 20, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's quite an interesting overrepresentation for this segment there.
Right, exactly. Right. I mean, you think there's some Portland breweries or breweries or some Seattle breweries that might have some NA offerings, but all from Bend. And hey, Bend is an adventure capital, right? Like people are out there skiing and hiking and doing all kinds of stuff. So maybe this is where that athletic consumer is looking to come in and try some non-alcoholic local versions.
That's interesting. It is a very outdoorsy town. So the Black Butte Porter looks beautiful. It looks like beer. Looks like a porter. I mean, in really nice head formation and decent retention. In terms of aroma, kind of coffee, porter smelling. I mean, really, so far, I would not know that this was non-alcoholic.
Okay, just from like the look and feel, yeah.
In the smell, yeah. So
Nice.
Let's see what it tastes like.
Yeah. While you're doing that, while you're tasting, I'll talk about the No-Mo IPA. So this one looks pretty similar to the 10 Barrel NA IPA. It's got a little haze to it, but again, it's not hazy. Slightly, like I'd say a golden color, like light amber, bordering on that orangish. The head retention looks really great. No lacing, but it does have a pretty dense, thick head that's kind of sticking around. I mean, it looks nice. If this was an IPA head, I'd be like, oh yeah, this is, looking like a great beer. It's not very clear, but it does look good. Oh man, and it smells Pacific Northwesty. Like holy moly, there's that like dank pine grapefruit character. Yeah, this one definitely it's totally different than the NA IPA, right? From 10 Barrel. 10 Barrel was totally tropical and fruit, and this is piney beer. This one actually sounds a lot more like the Fremont that you just tried.
So looking at the website for the Deschutes, we have a little more information here. They say pale wheat, caramel, carapils, and chocolate malt, Tettnang hops, less than 5% alcohol by volume, and 30 IBUs. In terms of flavor, it's very porter-esque. There's a little bit of a metallic twang, which can actually happen with even alcoholic porters. And I will say mine's from 4 months ago as well.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, mine too. I just looked at that too. My No-Mo's from May 9th, 2023. So it's, I don't know, three months ago. But still, that's a long time on the grocery store shelf.
The porter, it's a little thin for style for an alcoholic, porter. But the roast character, the chocolate, it's pretty nice. It's 30 IBUs, but no alcohol. So I think it comes off maybe a smidge bitter, but then again, like porter, I guess has some bitterness in it. So maybe it's not off style. I will admit I don't drink a ton of porter, mainly because no one makes it anymore. Typically what you see now with a dark beer, it's going to be like a giant, barrel aged banana infused stout or something like that, But it's pretty impressive. And I would love to try this on draft, and maybe that would avoid a little bit of the metallic twang I'm getting.
Yeah, some metallic twang. I'm getting a little bit of that same thing from the No-Mo as well, some of that metallic twang. I'm not getting as much of that starchiness in the No-Mo as I do in like the 10 Barrel and the Klausthaler. So this one's drinking a lot easier on the palate, but it's surprising. It's not bitter. It is bitter, but it's not like, overwhelmingly bitter. It's not like, sucking on a tea bag or something like that. It's bitter, but the hop flavor is interesting on it. It does taste like there's a lot of herbal and piney that's coming through. So if you were trying to recreate like what I would call a Northwest IPA, right, with these like intense pine aromas, or maybe an older version West Coast IPA, right? This is, if you're trying to recreate that, this does it. I mean, it nails that. Kind of like if you were trying to recreate like a Pliny or something. It's not super tropical. It's not super fruity. It's just like a very old school IPA, I would call it. And it nails that. I mean, the flavors are all there. The body is there. It doesn't taste thin. It's got the right mouthfeel, which is kind of nice. And I don't get that wordy flavor.
Yeah, I mean, and on the porter, I'm kind of struggling to find flaws. It's really pretty dang close to a alcoholic porter. It's got good body, probably a little thinner than an alcoholic porter, but pretty dang close. The malt character's pretty spot on. I'm really impressed. I gotta say, in terms of the craft offerings, I guess I only had 2 today, but I've had a couple crafts before, and this is the best craft NA beer I think I've ever had.
Yeah, those are, definitely some good showings today, and interestingly, I think I'll go ahead and go say it. I think the Coors Edge is my favorite from the day. I like it a lot.
I'm oscillating between Coors and maybe O'Doul's and the Black Butte. They scratch different itches though.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, right? That's great because you're not always looking for like beer flavored beer, right? I want beer flavored beer in an NA, but I'd really like to have a porter. That was one of my favorite things about Athletic, like I said earlier, just the range of styles. And pretty cool that Deschutes has got this non-alcoholic Black Butte porter available.
And you know what I will say, Cade? The ones that were good today, the Coors Edge, the O'Doul's, and the Black Butte porter, or the ones that were exceptional, I should say, I think that these are better than any gluten-free beer I've ever had.
Oh, no. I've had some really good gluten-free beers, so I'm not willing to say that. There's definitely been some great gluten-free beers out of there. But all in all, these are solid showings on non-alcoholic beers. Again, when I do dry January, when I'm looking to not have a beer, this is why I keep these stored in my fridge. It actually makes me a little sad. Maybe I need to get into them a little bit more often so that we can cycle through some of the inventory in the grocery store a little quicker. It's kind of a shame that we purchased all of these today, and they're so the production dates were so long ago. That's kind of a shock, but maybe a larger commentary on the American non-alcoholic beer industry itself. And I'm really sad that I didn't get to try Simon's beer. It's okay. I will do it at some point in the future, and I'll let everybody know what the Pichia Cluveri tastes like in a future episode. But pretty cool to taste through a bunch of different non-alcoholic beers and talk about them and say what we like and dislike, and provide some examples out there for people to talk about and think about. What do you think, Jordan? Anything else that you wanted to talk about today with respect to non-alcoholic beers?
This is a pretty enlightening experience for me, Cade. Having
nice.
Not tried that many before, I gotta say it's not bad. There were some good ones today, and I think that it kind of excites me for what this segment holds. Clearly, it can be done, and I'm excited to see what's next. Hopefully, someone can make a really, really good IPA or other styles, like a sour beer or something. Who knows? Seems like the sky's the limit here.
Exactly. And Marshall, all right, this means I'm coming for you. Brulosophy podcast experience episode. You and me going to try through some non-alcoholic beers, and we'll see if I can get you, like I got Jordan, to enjoy some non-alcoholic beers. But until then, we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Jordan and I will be here with our next Applying the Science episode. We'll see y'all then. The Brew Lab is a production of Brulosophy, where they who drink beer think beer. Don't forget to visit brulosophy.com to read about our weekly experiments and other brewing adventures, and listen to us talk about it on our other show, the Brulosophy Podcast. Thanks to all of our sponsors and patrons that help make this show possible. If you'd like to receive a reward for helping us do what we do, visit patreon.com/brulosophy to see how you can do just that. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back in the Brew Lab with another guest next week. Until then, think beer.